Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's the Ukraine War news update for the 18th of August 2023, the second part thereof. Please check out the first one released shortly prior to this. We're going to the frontline update, a kind of really quick synopsis of what's going on before a more robust separate video. There are the TLDR of this, the too long didn't read, is that there are some gains in the north in the Kupiansk sector. So Suryat Maps has further claims that the situation up in this Kupiansk axis or sector is to the benefit of the Russians here. They secured a crossroad between the town of Sinkivka and Petropavlivka, and thus beginning to envelop or doing an enveloping movement over the first town. In addition, a series of Ukrainian positions were taken south of Vilshana. Okay, so there's a crossroads there that's quite significant for the defense of Sinkivka, which is here, and that's the crossroads they're talking about. So some gains for the Russians there, which would be quite worrying for the Ukrainians, of course. There is some talk about sort of minimizing these gains and the effect that these have in the overall strategy of the whole war. Will these gains have significant impact? I don't know. If they can start sort of challenging places like Kupiansk, then yes. But whether they are using up troops unnecessarily to do that, and troops that could be better used in other places further down to the south, I don't know. It all depends whether the Ukrainians actually commit forces that would otherwise be used in counteroffensive operations further to the south. Anyway, so that's the situation there. I still don't know too much about what's going on in Bakhmut in terms of to the south of Bakhmut. Suryat Maps has some claims that in the north, the Ukrainians have been pushed back in the Solidar areas just south of Rozdilivka. Here, the Russians made small advances south of the town of Rozdilivka, as according to Suryat Maps. Not really too much to write home about, but it does show that the Ukrainians aren't pushing in that area. I've seen other analyses. So, for example, Radu Hosu, the Romanian analyst here, sometimes quite positive in their kind of in his analysis, but he talks, I think, about the opinion so here, let's look at Bakhmut. A few days ago, the Russians prepared a counteroffensive in the area and posted video showing us the success of recapturing parts of Andriivka. Then the next day, the Ukrainians released the final result of the battle. 3 T-90s lost 6 other Russian infantry fighting vehicles, or that almost equals the assault phalanx of an assault battalion lost to the Russians in a matter of hours. Okay, his personal opinion. So this is what I was coming on to. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't think the Ukrainian has any interest in recapturing Bakhmut at this point. And I do generally agree with this. The cost-benefit calculations, urban warfare, massing of new troops, high casualties, point us to a clear goal. Fixing a lot of decent quality Russian troops, especially the Rosgvardia and the VDV. We know the VDV were drafted in to help support after Wagner left. And you've got to, I'll come on to that in a second, which is a more important symbol now for Putin than for Ukraine. So keeping Bakhmut, that's the Russian intention there. Now, when the time comes, Bakhmut Fortress, the Wagner Cemetery, as I like to call it, will return to Ukraine. I actually agree with this, right? I think that stuff like this, like the loss of a few fields in the north of Bakhmut around Solidar, is of no consequence to the Ukrainians, because actually this is already a success. If the Russians are piling in troops to try and both defend Bakhmut and maybe take back a little bit of lost territory, then those troops are not down on the southern front lines that I think are far more important here. So I really do think Bakhmut was a massive success. I've really come around to thinking this. I was thinking this throughout the time, saying that if the ratios are what are claimed, then Bakhmut is fixing and attriting Russian troops so that they're exhausting themselves. And it is exactly what seemed to happen. And in fact, Bakhmut was the destruction of Wagner. Wagner are no longer in the fight. Wagner have effectively been wiped out. So, and they can go and fight in Niger, but as far as Ukraine is concerned, Wagner are really, to a large degree, no more. Bakhmut did them. Yes, Russians took the city of Bakhmut pretty much. And, the point is for the Ukrainians, looking at what their objectives really are. And like I keep saying, in areas like this is not going to be their primary objective, is not going to be taking territory. That is your tertiary objective at most. That will happen. It will happen after there are no more Russian troops left, and they've been attrited, or in this case, fixed here, so that they can't be used in more important areas of the front line. That's exactly what has happened. So, in a sense, the Ukrainians can say, yeah, you can have a bit of Solidar. Yeah, you can have a bit of Bakivka back. Yeah, we'll push and shove around here, but if you are reinforcing Bakhmut with a bunch of your VDV troops, then that's good for us. That's good for us because they ain't going to be using ain't going to be used elsewhere, and elsewhere is far more important to us than Bakhmut. Deep State map has changed a little bit around Klishivka, saying that there are some gains there for the Ukrainians. They're pushing the Russians back, but I think it's pretty minor, to be honest. I just don't know what's going on in Klishivka. It's a bit of a mystery. There's not being any much information coming out there from the Ukrainians. And we're going to bypass Avdiivka and Marinka, just quickly settle on Uruzhany, where there are continued successes around here. As you can see, considering only the other day, this was the salient, or these were the Russian lines here. So they went something like, well, before Staromyorsky. So Staromyorsky fell. It looked a bit like that, and now you can see the amount of territory that has been taken there. It is looking a lot healthier for the Ukrainians here, having some success to the east of Uruzhany. Defmon here says a geolocated video shows slight Ukrainian advance north of. Oh, that's in Robotna. That's in the wrong place. Damn you, Defmon. Sorry. Update on the Uruzhany Staromilsky area. Major problems for the Russians. The Ukrainian forces have broken through the Russian defenses along the east flank of Uruzhany. So that's where I was just pointing out. That's this area there, whilst also pushing everywhere else. Making significant advances in the last 12 hours. The Ukrainians have also positioned units from the 31st Marine Brigade and the 3rd Assault Brigade in the area of Uruzhany and continue to put pressure on Zvitne Bazhanya. I think that will be falling pretty imminently. That town, it's under quite a lot of pressure as it is. Another source, Warfrontline, says Ukrainians broke through the Russian defenses east of the village of Uruzhany yesterday. At this point, aerial reconnaissance of the armed forces of Ukraine with a drop from the Mavic drone destroyed a Russian infantry fighting vehicle. And today, a number of strongholds have come under the control of Ukraine, which is also confirmed by the resources of the enemy. So again, a bit of geolocated footage to suggest that the Russians are under a bit of pressure there. So then we're going to come to the actually Syriac maps, I think, is talking about around Uruzhany here. So that is an agreement from the pro-Russian mapper Syriac maps to show that, around the east of Uruzhany, things are looking good for the Ukrainians. So as I say, we'll come out, go to the west, and now come to Robotna, where there are continued gains here as well, both inside Robotna. As you can see, the Russians have been pushed right back to the southern outskirts of the town, at least according to Andrew Perpetua, slightly more in the middle, as according to Syriac maps, and some pushes further to the east as well, rather similar to Uruzhany. So let's go to a few sources. The armed forces of Ukraine advance in the village of Robotna, taking control of most of the settlement. That's according to Getty there. We have, going back to Defmon now, advancing north of Verbove as well. So this town here, you can see the major trench lines. This is the one that they have negotiated themselves over, the Ukrainians, and they're kind of going down the trench lines. But there's quite an intersection of trenches around here to the northwest of Verbove. So this is going to be a difficult area for the Ukrainians to take. And you've got two lines of trenches to the west of Verbove. But going south from Robotna might be somewhat easier. I showed you that footage earlier in my first video of the ease with which, I think, was that around Robotna or was it around, it might have been at Uruzhany. Once you get past some of these minefields, major minefields, it might not be that the Russians have fully mined behind. We've seen some tanks drive quite freely once they've got past the minefields. And this was a claim I shared with you yesterday, that they've got past the worst of the mines in a couple of these areas, and that is really, really significant, and that's what you're wanting to happen, and that's kind of perhaps the beginning of the dam cracking, the floodgates opening. Maybe that could be me being too optimistic. Right, Talking about Robotna, west of the village, fighting continues to control over the line of strongholds leading to the village of Kupani. So this is now saying to the west of Robotna, things are also looking good going towards Kupane over here. And to continue, positional battles continue Robotna itself and southeast of Robotna. Armed forces of Ukraine advanced along to forest belts. So that would be to the southeast here. Quite what those forest belts are, I don't know. It could well be these, but that would be quite significant because that is really to the south of Robotna. It could be elsewhere though, so it's a bit vague there. And so that is what those sources say. There is a little bit from Syriac maps here saying, "Oops, oh, I hate it when it does that." So Syriac maps is a little bit more guarded in the Robotna area, saying that slowly the Ukrainian army is entering the town, forcing the Russian army to move southwards due to the intensive artillery fire. And intensive artillery fire, that on the contrary side, is also provoking many deaths in the Ukrainian ranks. It's very premature to say that the battle for the town is over. That is, I think, interpreting that very positively for the Russians. I think it will be hard. The Ukrainians will be taking heavy losses. We know that they're taking heavy losses in terms of equipment, as I've shared with you already today. So this comes at a cost. Of course it does. This is offensive operations from the Ukrainians. Now, Radu Hosu of these areas says Velika Novosilka, so that's going back. Well, no, we'll stay in the Robotna area. He says that the 82nd Parachute Brigade has entered the fray with at least 2,000 soldiers and includes 14 Challenger 2s, Strikers, and Marders. Well, I don't know if they're fully involved. I don't know that Challengers are in the fray yet. Personal opinion, the 82nd and 46th Air Assault Brigades are among the most experienced and were chosen along with the other brigades attacking in this direction specifically to penetrate the front where the enemy least expects it. Where the Russians have the most complex fortification system, I find that quite interesting. Attacking where they're the strongest, yeah, you might least expect it, but it's the most difficult thing to do. It reminds me of Blackadder Goes Forth, the British comedy series. They don't expect us to attack for the 19th time in a row in the same place, and it's like, it'd be stupid. Why would we attack? That's exactly why we should attack, etc., etc. Anyway, go and watch it. Velika Novosilka, Mariupol axis after the massacre suffered by the Russians at Orozhany, where the Ukrainians did not break contact with the retreating Russians. It seems to be heading towards Kremenchuk and not as we expected south towards Staromelnyivka, so heading more easterly direction around Orozhany at the same time. Also, sources claim that between the Ukrainian lines and Staromelnyivka, there are no more Russians. They have retreated behind the fortifications of the Surovikin line. It's a personal opinion, yeah. This axis is most heavily glassed in by complex Russian fortifications. This means that on the one hand, the Ukrainians have an easier mission, but also in the area topographically, the Ukrainians have a disadvantage due to relatively large height differences. The Russians control the next few kilometers to Mariupol. So what he's basically saying there is that in this area, there is some topography that needs to be considered as opposed to the defensive trench lines. Right, and finally we go down to Kherson, to to Kazachi Lahiri, where there have been these kind of different claims about what is going on. The Russians have claimed that they have kicked the Ukrainians out there. Radu Hosu says what is happening in the Kherson area is kind of cat and mouse game in which the Ukrainians are careful to eliminate reservists and artillery from the area in order to force the dislocation of other Russian troops from the southern front. This is their first objective, and their later objective, the opening of the battlefront, is to put pressure on the Russian commanders to confuse Russian officers and panic the lower morale Russian troops on what I call South Kherson Island, bounded on the west and north by the Dnieper River and on the south by Crimea, and the east by the Kherson-Zaporizhia Oblast demarcation line. So he's fairly buoyant about that. He says there's been much speculation based on what is currently happening in this area. According to personally verified sources, the Russians have failed to drive the Ukrainians out of the Kazachi Lahiri area, even though the Russians have officially claimed so. At the same time, in recent days, several convoys of Russian equipment coming from the Vasilivka axis, which is relatively quiet, have been destroyed by HIMARS. Okay, I can't confirm that claim at all, but he's saying that his own contacts say that the Ukrainians haven't been pushed out of the Kozachi Lahiri at all. He says that reinforcements are coming down from the Vasilivka axis, which is kind of this Piatikhatki area, this kind of area here, to support Kherson, and that the convoys have been hit by HIMARS. Haven't seen evidence of that yet, but that would be interesting. Now, pontoon bridge claims. So we had Chuck Farrer the other day saying there are 2 pontoon bridges made, and then people poured scorn on that. There's absolutely no satellite evidence of that happening, but there may be pontoon ferries, rafting equipment across. And this could be a much more sensible idea. And in fact, there is some video evidence coming out about this. Don't know when and where this was, but we have some equipment. Here we have a self-propelled howitzer, at least being taken across the river somewhere. So I imagine there's going to be that kind of activity taking place, but it depends where they are alighting that equipment, because it can be some pretty difficult terrain in some of these places. Anyway, that's a sort of quick synopsis of the front line. We're going to go on to military aid now. Ukraine may receive remaining Czech Soviet-made helicopter gunships. So Ukraine may receive Soviet-made Mi-24 and 35 helicopter gunships from Czechia's stocks, as its military is decommissioning them in favor of newer US models, the Czech news agency has stated, citing the defense minister. During an address to lawmakers and military officers, the defense minister said that the Mi-24 and 35 helicopters provided excellent service. Quote, although we are giving them a symbolic farewell today, their story is not over. And that'd be fantastic. So these would be really useful for the Ukrainians, because they use these already. They know how to use them. They have some use. You know, the Mi-24 Hind D and Mi-35 Hind E flying tanks are Russia's counterpart to Boeing's Apache large helicopter gunship. I mean, these have been around for a long time now, but they, as you've seen from plenty of footage on the front line, they do get used effectively, or somewhat effectively. Germany delivers 2 more IRIS-T air defense systems. These are the first picture is the IRIS-T SLS, so short-range launchers, of which Germany has just delivered 2 to Ukraine. Germany bought 12 of these launchers back from Sweden and has installed them on a new 4x4 truck chassis, while in Sweden they had been mounted on the BvS-10. The German government announced on the August 17th the delivery of another military aid package to Ukraine, including 2 IRIS-T air defense systems and around 4,500 rounds of 155mm ammunition. This time, Berlin handed over the launchers for the short-range SLS modification of the IRIS-T, which can reach targets 12 kilometers away. Earlier, Germany sent Ukraine 2 IRIS-T SLM, that's medium-range air defense systems with a range of up to 40 kilometers. The aid package also includes 10 ground surveillance radars GO-12, 4 truck tractor trains, 4 semi-trailers, and 8 load-handling trucks. This is good news. They still need as much air defense as they can get their hands on, the Ukrainians. The UK, speaking of which, has agreed to supply Ukraine with air defense equipment worth of more than $115 million. I don't know what that is, but the UK yet again is like, yeah, we have nothing in the locker because of underfunding and procurement issues and whatever. But we'll happily pay for a bunch of stuff. So they're obviously going around the world looking for things, buying them for the Ukrainians, and that I'm sure is fantastic news. Good stuff. Now, on the F-16 debacle, Ukraine will receive F-16 aircraft as soon as the training of Ukrainian pilots is completed. This was stated by the head of Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba. I think that the Ukrainian pilots will return from the training and the planes with them too. Maybe they won't arrive directly in the cockpits, but it will be a synchronized process, says Kuleba. Good news there. Newsweek is reporting that Ukraine is trying to convince the US of the feasibility of transferring M26 cluster shells. These M26 cluster projectiles are capable of being fired from M142 HIMARS and M270 rocket launchers, so things like the Mars one I was talking about earlier. According to Dan Rice, cluster rockets have longer range than artillery shells. They could help the Ukrainian army overcome echelon defense. Rice expressed his belief that in the event of the transfer of 2,000 units of ammunition, such ammunition, Ukraine would gain a significant advantage in the war. I mean, this would be great from a military point of view. Of course, those against cluster munitions will not like this, but we've had all those arguments already. I think this would be used. I think Ukraine need everything we can give them in terms of capability and capacity. Ukrainians have donated themselves $6.5 million in 3 days to buy 10,000 kamikaze drones. According to the project description, 10,000 FPV first person view drones will be purchased from the manufacturer abroad. Ukrainian manufacturers will equip the drones with Ukrainian made ammunition. And that's really good. There's a really strong push to both produce stuff indigenously, even if they can't produce the drones outright, then to equip them in Ukraine with Ukrainian manufactured munitions, and yeah, getting Ukrainian training on these. And some really interesting couple of segments on Ukraine, the latest podcast through the Daily Telegraph that talked a lot about how the Ukrainians are really developing their drone manufacturing and, I guess, uh, adaptation. So if they don't manufacture them, they adapt them. That whole program and their training program, well worth listening to. Right. This is a second Oryx list. I shared one with you in the previous video. Dad's Army list of Russian army equipment deployed in Ukraine older than our parents. It depends. Some of you might be quite old and have very old parents, or sadly parents who have deceased. So I do apologise if that labeling is incorrect. Shut up, piss. Right. Okay. So this list I find pretty pretty fascinating. So these are the pieces of equipment that Russia have used and are using that are just really old. So in terms of tanks, T-54s, T-54 3BA, T-62 Obrya 1967, T-64A, all of those from the, from 1951 is some of those tanks, I mean G, up to 1967. Armored fighting vehicles, 1962. Infantry fighting vehicles, 1966, APCs, 1954, 66, armored recovery vehicles, 1967. We've got some howitzers from the 40s, from literally the Second World War. We've seen there have been evidence of D1 howitzers used, D30s and D20s from the 50s, 60s, Grad launchers from the 60s, anti-aircraft guns from the 50s and 60s, so on and so forth. You get the point. I mean, just quite incredible how much stuff is being used. There you go. It even claims that spades from the 1870s, and a Maxim machine gun that's been used in. We've seen Ukrainians use a Maxim. They've set that up and said it's a pretty decent piece of kit. And of course, that's not to say that none of this can't do a job, right? It's not to say that actually you get a piece of lead landing on your head from a T-54B. You don't go, hang on, that's not going to hurt me. It's from 1959. It's still going to hurt. But if you are desperate enough to be using this vehicle, digging into your reserves this much, then it is representative of a deep, deep problem that you have. That's significant, or significance of a list like this. Right. Here is a piece in the Washington Post. Now, I referenced a piece about how the Ukraine is going to struggle to take Melitopol, and you may not like that too much as a piece. Depends what your analysis of it is. But here we have a piece on Russian drone manufacture. This is by Dalton Bennett and Mary Ilyushina. That say the title is "Inside the Russian Efforts to Build 6,000 Attack Drones with Iran's Help." So you basically got Russia's $1 billion weapons deal with Iran coming to life in November, 500 miles east of Moscow in the Tatarstan region. Its aim is to domestically build 6,000 drones by summer 2025, enough to reverse the Russian army's chronic shortage of unmanned aerial vehicles on the front line. If it succeeds, a sprawling new drone factory could help Russia preserve its dwindling supply of precision munitions, thwart Ukraine's effort to retake occupied territory, and dramatically advance Moscow's position in the drone arms race that is remaking modern warfare. And it continues, altogether, the documents indicate that despite delays and a production process that is deeply reliant on foreign produced electronic components, Moscow has made steady progress towards its goal of manufacturing a variant of the Iranian Shahed 136, an attack drone capable of traveling more than 1,000 miles. The documents show that the facility's engineers are trying to improve on Iran's dated manufacturing techniques, using Russian industrial expertise to produce the drones on a larger scale than Tehran has achieved, and with a greater quality control. The engineers are also exploring improvements to the drone itself, including making it capable capable of swarm attacks in which the drones autonomously coordinate a strike to strike a target, so on and so forth. The research team found that the project faces challenges, including doubt that its ability to reach its desired staffing levels, but caution that Russia might be able to overcome those difficulties. Quote, Russia has a credible way of building over the next year or so a capability to go from periodically launching tens of imported Shahed 136 kamikaze drones against Ukrainian targets to more regularly attacking with hundreds of them. Is one of the quotes from the article, and so on and so forth. So this is a worry. The Russians are definitely building up a plan that seems to be certainly potentially achievable to produce all of these drones themselves rather than import them from Iran and be dependent on Iran. This will depend itself on their ability to acquire components, often through loopholes in the sanctions, maybe through Kyrgyzstan and other nations around. But this is a challenge. It's a big old article, worth, I'm sure, a read. Yes, slightly worrying for the Ukrainians going forward. Okay, Ukraine weapons tracker. So remaining on, I guess, topics concerning Iran. Not all of them are originally manufactured by Iran. What's he talking about? But all are likely delivered from their stocks. Regarding the 120mm mortar bombs referred to, they might be Burmese, as they are very similar looking. Okay, this is referring to his original comment. The Russian military now uses ammunition made by Myanmar, so as was Burma. Burmese 120 ER 120mm high explosive mortar bombs recently appeared in Russian servers. Previously, no transfers of ammunition from Myanmar to Russia have been reported. So either they come from Iran or from Myanmar or both. So Tatragami says, important update, Russian military is utilizing 120mm mortar shells originating from Iran. The ammunition appears to have been in use since at least July and continues to be actively used in August. This is what the Ukraine weapons tracker is replying to. Yet to see any proof of the use of Iranian 120mm mortar bombs, but since July, Russian artillerymen started to receive Iranian 122mm and 152mm projectiles, Grad rockets, and presumably 106 M106 203mm projectiles for the Pion, which is a large gun that the Russians use. So there are kind of claims that they're using Iranian ammunition, and then other claims that actually could well be from Myanmar. Or both. But this is where Russia are out there doing close deals with those kinds of nations. And although you might kind of scoff at those kind of deals, they are still getting that kit that can still do damage and kill Ukrainian soldiers. So it's still significant. Euromaidan Press, moving on to geopolitical stuff here. The first cargo ship successfully passed through, and this is something a lot of you have been wondering about, successfully passed through the Ukrainian sea corridor without Russia using what that kind of means is away from the Russians without using Russian territorial waters or possibly even international waters. So moving through the nations that the coastal nations here, going through their waters. As of 11:28 today, that'd be yesterday, container ship Joseph Schulte entered the territorial sea of Bulgaria carrying more than 30,000 tons of cargo. So if you can get a shipping lane that can successfully get to the Bosphorus Straits without having to go through a Russian blockade there, because they can't blockade in say Bulgarian waters, then this will be, and Romanian waters, this will be really, really significant. Tim White says, talking about this issue, so there was that Turkish ship under the flag of Palau the other day that was boarded by a Russian helicopter. Turkey has issued a warning to Russia about inflaming tensions in the Black Sea after supposedly boarding a non-military ship. Turkey also hit back at criticism and didn't react to the original incident, saying effectively it wasn't their place to do so. I'm wondering whose place it was. But nonetheless, and it's good to see Turkey scold Russia. Let's hope that we don't see successful boardings like that going forward, but they are still blockading. Official here from the Kiev Independent saying Ukraine will not completely fulfill all EU recommendations by October. Ukraine will not completely fulfill all the 7 EU recommendations presented to Kyiv to launch accession talks by October, Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration has said, reported by Interfax Ukraine. Now, the country should be able to ensure the implementation of all agreed legislative and institutional steps by that period. However, it would be incredible if suddenly Ukraine, in the midst of a war, could jump through all the hoops EU need them to in order to gain accession to the EU. That'd just be insanely amazing, but incredibly unlikely. So this comes as no surprise. They have to change the way they do things. They have to have all this kind of transparency, corruption got rid of, and the way you do, free press and trade, and all these kind of things that you have to tick the boxes to gain, as I say, accession to the EU. That is a challenge at the best of times. Doing that in wartime is really, really difficult. So it looks like Ukraine aren't going to be able to do that, but that to me is no great surprise. It might be a shame to some. According to The Guardian, Poland arrests 9 over an alleged plot to sabotage Ukrainian arms supplies. 9 are said to be members of Russian spy ring that monitored railway lines and made plans to disrupt deliveries. So that's a further 9. There have been people arrested for this previously, so the Russians are still active within Poland doing that kind of stuff. A lot of reconnaissance and arguably sabotage as well. Meanwhile, in Makachkala, so this is a place that had a gas station and whatnot that blew up, that caused all sorts of problems. I don't even remember. I reported it the other day. A large number of deaths in the area from that, and injuries. A huge explosion. Anyway, big street protests in Russia in that southern city there. You may remember this is a key port on the Caspian Sea, and where hundreds were killed and injured in a huge explosion this week. But people aren't protesting about that, but the frequent long power cuts. Now, what's this got to do necessarily with the Ukrainian war? Not necessarily a lot, but if you get discord in Russia, and if you see people on the streets and then thinking they're not getting arrested and put away for this, then you gain in confidence. This kind of stuff can breed, it can work like a bit of a virus. That would be my hope. But it also shows that there is discontent with Russian ruling in areas around Russia. Also shows you that, oh my goodness, this is one of the biggest producers of energy in the world, Russia, and it can't give consistent energy to its major towns and cities the length and breadth of the country. Just, yeah, and that goes to show that it's just largely a kleptocracy rather than in a functioning, decent government like a democratic government. You're less likely to see stuff like this in a fully functioning democratic government, especially if you have all of those hydrocarbons stored beneath your soil. Right, anyway, thanks so much. Really appreciate the time you've spent with me. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.